Hey all, here at OS Reviews, you're watching our throwback review of the Samsung ATIV Smart PC, also known as the 500T. We're taking a look back at this 2-in-1 convertible tablet here in 2018, primarily because of price. You can find a refurbished unit on Amazon or eBay for under $100, which makes it really affordable as a full-sized 11.6-inch tablet that runs on a full desktop operating system. It came originally with Windows 8, so you have that Metro UI that was suited for touchscreens and tablets, and that is compared to Surfaces as well as more current Windows tablets, which tend to cost at the lowest $200 or $300. So this is definitely a lot cheaper. If you're on a budget, you might be thinking, well, is this still something that I should consider or not? And we'll be discussing that primarily in this video. First, let's start with the design and specifications. Now, the 500T, as part of the ATIV line, looks very similar on the outside to the Samsung Slate Series 7. That was a even earlier tablet that we reviewed. It had a full Intel Core i5 processor coupled with 4 gigs of RAM, and it was a powerful tablet for the time. It's still a very respectable tablet in terms of running full desktop applications. This one is a lot weaker in terms of processor. It has a energy-efficient Intel Clover Trail Atom processor, which is a dual-core chipset clocked up to 1.8 gigahertz. That is compared to Bay Trail and Cherry Trail processors that we have today, which are quad-core, and that actually makes a larger difference than you would expect. Going back to a Clover Trail device, loading up certain tasks definitely felt slower, so be prepared to wait a few seconds longer for loading up certain programs and for browsing the web. So it's not quite as fast. In terms of benchmark, that's also reflected because Bay Trails are about 2 times higher in terms of benchmark scores. 2 gigs of RAM, though, again, it seems a little bit low for 2018, but it's still passable, I think, as a bare minimum, as a threshold for tablets these days. And as long as you're not demanding or opening up too many programs, it still works. It does have front-facing speakers, one on either side, which is a plus and makes it a great entertainment device. The IPS capacitive touchscreen display offers pretty good colors, and it's also fairly bright. However, it's only a 720p panel because that was pretty much the norm back in 2013 when this tablet was released. So it's not going to be nearly as pixel dense. If you look closely, you'll definitely notice pixelation because of the larger screen size here. It also has 64 gigs of built-in eMMC. It's not SSD either because the 500T back then was meant as a slightly mid-end, low-end tablet to begin with. So keep those things in mind. Now, this is a 2-in-1, so there's an optional keyboard dock that you can put it into, and it transforms into a laptop or an Ultrabook. But that's sold separately, and it works pretty well. It's a pretty standard chiclet layout. On the top here, we do have access to a webcam, proximity light sensors. Down below, there's a physical key that brings up the home screen, as well as tiles and switches back and forth. The bottom here is the serial connector for the dock, and on the edge here, we do have access to a proprietary charging port. The tablet is fully charged up in under 4 hours. On the side here, we have access to a micro HDMI port, which is covered by a flap. There's a volume rocker that feels very similar to other Samsung Galaxy phones. If you've used one of those, you'll know how it feels. The top here also has a 3.5mm headphone jack, a dedicated power switch, and there's also a rotation lock button. On the very top here, there's also a full-size USB port. This is a rare feature and one I'm glad to see on an older device. You can easily plug in a thumb drive or a peripheral, a mouse, or even a keyboard, and it's pretty nice. The only thing I'm not a huge fan of is that it's a little recessed, and the fact that it has this door covering it makes it a little bit harder to access on the day in and day out. On the side here, there's also additional covers that protects a SIM card slot because I have the version that supports 4G LTE, and there's also a micro SD card slot for expanding the memory. It supports up to 128 gigabytes. The display is protected by Corning's Gorilla Glass, although the back here is very glossy and made entirely out of plastic. It brings you back to the days where Samsung still made primarily plastic phones, and this is the case once again. This tablet originally retailed for around $600, so it's not cheap, but it's also not one of their premium models. Regardless, it's a polycarbonate finish, so there's no removable battery, but everything still feels fairly solid in the hand. It doesn't creak or cringe, and as a whole, it's still a very slim tablet, so it's about the same slimness as an iPad and even more modern Windows tablets. So design-wise, it's held up relatively well. The back also features an 8-megapixel autofocus camera with LED flash, actually one of the better cameras that you'll find on a Windows tablet even today, and there's some some serial numbers. Now, what's interesting here is that on the regular version of the Samsung ATIV 500T is a stylus. It's an S Pen. It's an active stylus made by Wacom that supports 1024 levels of pressure sensitivity, which makes this tablet great for artists, great for students, for note-taking, and it actually works really well. It's the same stylus found on the Galaxy Notes. But unfortunately on this one, it doesn't come with it, and that's because all versions that have 4G LTE don't have the stylus built in. So it's a little bit sad that you can only choose one or the other. So if handwriting matters more to you, if you're an artist, then definitely choose the regular version with only Wi-Fi. But if you want cellular connectivity everywhere you go, then you can pick the 4G version. Both are about the same price now. As the tablet is booting up here, we'll do a very quick size comparison with some of the aforementioned tablets. Here is a Chewy Surbook Mini. This is another convertible that's new here in 2017, 2018, and has a very similar thickness, about the same thickness again as the Surface. And the competitor that we recently revisited as well is the Fujitsu Stylistic that runs on the AMD Z60 processor, a competitor to the Clover Trail running on the Samsung ATIV. And you can see that dimensions are once again pretty much the same. Samsung is actually slightly thinner than all of them, so still works pretty well. So let's talk a little bit about, again, who this tablet is suitable for. I would say that if you're in 2018 and looking to purchase this tablet, it would be a good choice for students. I say that because the presence of an S Pen or a built-in active stylus is really a differentiating feature between this and many other tablets on the market, especially one that tucks in really neatly on the side. We're now booted into Windows 8, and although the screen is fairly bright and responsive, it does reflect quite a bit of light just because of the glossy nature. That being said, 11 inches means that you do have a pretty large surface area, so for watching videos, especially in this widescreen 16:9 format, it actually works quite well. For web browsing and for note-taking, it doesn't work quite as well as something like an iPad, which has a 4:3 aspect ratio. It's slightly more boxy. So if we take a closer look here, what I do have to point out is battery life is probably one of the best elements of a Clover Trail tablet. In fact, it can be even more energy efficient than a current generation Intel Cherry Trail or Bay Trail device. This tablet will get you up to 12 hours of performance, screen on time, for general navigation, for quick web browsing, things like that, which is outstanding. And it's very quick to wake up from sleep as well. You simply tap it to go to sleep and then tap on the power again and it wakes up. Otherwise, Samsung has installed some of their own applications on here, but it's not too heavy or dramatic. There's access to Internet Explorer, the standard kind of Microsoft Store utilities, and then on the side here there's also a few Samsung specific apps. They've installed Netflix for video streaming. Microsoft Office is also built in, which is nice. And on the side here there's also a few demo versions of games and apps such as Kindle Reader. There is the S Camera and S Player, which are Samsung's versions of media players and interfaces for the camera. Norton Security, there's a QR scanner from Samsung that uses the camera to scan the codes for quickly looking up products. And there's also Samsung's own store for downloading some quick apps and things. There's also a built-in Merriam-Webster dictionary. In the desktop view, if we look up the system properties, you can tell that only about 20 gigs is remaining out of the 64 gigs. So there's definitely a lot of memory taken up by the operating system plus Samsung's own apps, and after a few updates, things like that. It doesn't leave you with that much memory, so especially if you are planning on installing media collections like movies or music, you really have to put in your own SD card, and also be cautious of how many programs that you really want to install, even though it's running on a desktop operating system. So from here, if we talk about the camera performance first, let's go into this menu interface. I'm just going to show you that using S Camera. Again, at 8 megapixels, it's actually one of the better cameras available for a tablet, especially one running on Windows. The interface here from Samsung is pretty simple, and it's similar to what you would find on a Galaxy device. You can actually zoom in and out using digital zoom, and there's also assisted autofocus in addition to a flash settings. On the side here, I can also change the image to recording video up to 720p, and I can switch also to the front-facing camera that also does a pretty good job for video chatting. It's bright enough to still see your face, even in rooms where there isn't a lot of lighting in the background. So overall, actually a pretty decent camera. So taking a look at some of the photos that I took with this earlier, you can see that the image quality, again, especially at 8 megapixels, is quite good. There's a lot of detail that you can zoom into, and as long as you hold things without shaking, colors are also pretty accurate. So as a whole, definitely one of the better cameras I've seen on a tablet. Going to web browsing with Chrome, let's try the New York Times. This is a good benchmark as a complex page that lower-end hardware tends to struggle with because there's lots of moving elements, lots of flash and videos that will pop up. But you can see on this tablet, it actually loads up fairly quickly. It's still waiting for everything to completely render, but once it does, hopefully the experience becomes a little bit more smooth for navigation. It's certainly not bad. Obviously, because there's only 2 gigs of RAM built onto this tablet, if you open up too many tabs, I would say more than 3 or 4, that's where performance becomes much more choppy. When you only have, let's say, 1 tab open and there's not a lot of other apps open in the background, performance is definitely still quite responsive and good enough for web browsing. The accelerometer is also fairly fast, so if I kind of switch it to the portrait orientation, you can see that it works. Windows 8, just like on Windows 10, does support multitasking, so you can have split screen views just by dragging up a different program from the side, and that is actually pretty nice of a feature. So I can open up 2 screens, for instance, and pull back and forth between those apps. So let's go back into the horizontal view here, and the page has now fully loaded, and hopefully now browsing and scrolling is a little bit faster. So all in all, although it's no longer quite as smooth as an experience as when the tablet is new, also not bad. Let's try watching a YouTube video next. So this is what the on-screen keyboard looks like. One of the benefits of Windows 8 is that you don't have to toggle to tablet mode for the virtual keyboard to pop up whenever you tap on a text box. Alright, so pausing the music there, the takeaway is that the sound quality of the speakers are actually very good for a tablet. Since they're front-facing, it's hard to cover up, especially since it's so wide, and even when you try to, sound still passes through really well. So this makes it a great entertainment tablet for watching videos, for streaming Netflix, things like that. Although the bass could be more prominent, since there really is no passive radiator or something larger for a driver on here, overall it already delivers pretty clean audio quality. So if you're watching a quick clip or sharing something with friends and family, it more than suffices. Obviously, a Bluetooth speaker will give you more bass and probably a slightly louder sound, but it's not necessarily needed on this particular tablet. Again, the design very similar to something like the HTC One M8, and again, pretty unique for a tablet at this particular price now of around $100. So going back now to this main screen, the takeaway is, again, for video watching, it actually does a pretty good job. You can see that some of the animations in terms of switching back and forth between full screen and like navigating really quickly, you'll notice a little bit of lag and delay, but it's not too bad. And most things that you would want to do can still be loaded. Don't expect the fastest, smoothest experience, but overall still very much serviceable. Now again, the experience becomes much more slow and sluggish once you have lots of tabs open. So if I have, let's say, another tab open and then something like the New York Times is a third tab, that's where jumping back and forth becomes much more sluggish, as you can see here. And especially if you have a video playing back in 1080p and then New York Times loading up, and that's where things get boggled down. 2 gigs of RAM and the Intel Clover Trail, which is again a dual-core processor, is really I would say a bare minimum here in 2018. Anything slower than this package is really difficult to use now, with web pages getting more and more complex. And really, Bay Trail processors, quad-core chipsets give you much superior performance. You'll have to wait a lot less, and with more RAM, obviously, you can open up more tabs as well without having to wait quite as much. So here's a mobile title, Plants vs. Zombies, a trial version that's running, for some reason, on the desktop version page instead of on the Metro UI page. But you can see that overall it works. It's not a very graphically intensive game, of course, but you'll see a little bit of choppiness, but overall it's still playable and easy to use with the multi-touch touchscreen display. Other things Other titles, like this obviously will work, such as Flash games directly built onto browsers, so very light games, HTML games, things like that will run without too many issues. The tablet does not have built-in GPS, but with cellular connectivity on this 4G version and with Wi-Fi can still find your location pretty easily. This is actually using Bing Maps, but obviously Google Maps can be installed since it's just a computer. Any of the standard utilities that you find online can be downloaded and fully run. But again, some of these utility programs that are optimized better for tablet mode also work pretty well, like this weather app, for instance. So that's more or less it for our review of the, or actually revisited review of the Samsung ATIV 500T here in 2018. I would say that in general, Clover Trail tablets aren't an ideal choice. For $100, if you shop around, you can actually find Bay Trail tablets for about the same price, to be completely honest. Something like the first generation Asus Transformer Prime is a Bay Trail tablet, also with 2 gigs of RAM, but it has a quad-core processor that actually is a lot more snappy in day-to-day navigation. This one, it really isn't bad for a lot of these light tasks, such as for basic web browsing. If you only open up 2 or 3 tabs, you won't really feel a huge difference, but if you are opening up more tabs, if you have, again, more multitasking going on, that's where you'll notice a lot more slowdown in between. Everything still works, but you just have to wait for a few seconds longer for it to completely render. I would say that it's still a passable tablet in 2018. I mean, the build quality is nice, the speakers are very good, it has a great camera as well for a tablet, and the full-size USB port is also quite rare for a Windows machine now, especially one that's really thin, and obviously Clover Trail has excellent battery endurance. With that being said, Bay Trail tablets will probably be my recommendation at this point, considering that you can get a slightly used model for about the same price if you shop around. And the ATIV also isn't a bad choice. It packs an impressively large display, it also has really good battery life, and again, that S Pen support, which is a great handwriting recognition pen that is going to be a great choice for students. So again, as a quick note-taking digital journal for under $100 and for occasional YouTube videos and browsing the web, actually not a bad deal, especially since you have such a larger display than what you could get on a smartphone, that it does make a bit of sense. So you can check out more details about the Samsung ATIV 500T series Windows tablet in our Throwback article, but for now this has been our video. Thanks for watching here at OS Reviews. This has been our look back of this Clover Trail powered Samsung Windows 8 tablet.